Live on WFLA Now. This is Run for Fun with running enthusiast Leigh Spann.
All right, let's go. Welcome back to the Stream Center here at WFLA Now for this week's episode of Run for Fun with Leigh Spann. This is a show that we created to bust the idea that running is punishment. There are ways you can actually make running fun. And when things are fun, guess what? You do them more. And that leads to an overall healthier lifestyle. So I'm Leigh Spann. I'm a meteorologist here at WFLA, but I've also been running for about 13 years now. And to be honest, I spent the first 5 years or so doing it all wrong. But once I learned how to train and run properly, guess what? It became a whole lot funner. And I wanted to share that with more people. And the person who really helped me find that, Coach Maria. She joins us every week. Good morning, Coach.
Hello.
We are headed up to Cincinnati this weekend.
I know. I'm so excited.
Yeah, it's a big race up there called the Flying Pig Marathon. So I'll be running 26.2 hilly miles up in Cincinnati. And we're going to talk all about it next week, how it went.
Yeah, it'll be fun. I have 7 runners doing it, actually. It'll be fun.
And this is one, we'll talk more about it next week, but this is an actual race that I am running for fun. I'm taking my own advice, running it for fun.
I know. Sometimes you got to do that.
Yeah, so it takes a little bit of the stress off trying to hit some time. Just
absolutely
get out there and put one foot in front of the other for 26.2 miles.
Looking forward to it.
All right, so one of the things that also makes running a little more fun, of course, is running with a group. And we want to remind you about our Strava running group. It is getting to be pretty hefty now. We got about 96 members. And what this means is you go on Strava. It's a free downloadable app on your phone. And then when you go for a walk or you go for a run, it tracks how fast you've gone, where you've gone, the distance and things like that so that you can look back at not only what you've done, but then you can talk to other of these 96 runners. So whenever you go to get the Strava app, you can go to the clubs and you can go to the groups and find WFLA Run for Fun. Maria answers questions. There's places where you can post. It's really, it's a little bit more of a social media app. So one of the things that I found so fun about the running community is the community itself. So we're trying to create that in the virtual world. And so we're excited about being able to bring that to you. So hopefully more of you will join our Strava group. So today, Maria, the topic is really interesting. And I was talking about it behind the scenes this morning during our newscast about hormones and how they, keeping them in a healthy range can really make running not hurt as much in the long run.
And I think the big question is, what is that healthy range?
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's so individualized and there's so much new research about it. And it's something that we really need to talk about.
And we are not the experts on it, right? So we brought in a Tampa physician, Dr. Michael Heim. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Michael.
Thank you for having me. Yes.
And so why don't you guys go ahead and talk about your history together and how you guys came to know each other?
Yeah, that's a great start. When I moved to Tampa in, I think it was 2012, I had come off a couple of Boston marathons. I was training for Ironman. And all of a sudden, my performance had dropped. I wasn't able to hit times I was normally hitting on the track. I was significantly out of breath at the paces that I shouldn't be out of breath at. And I really was struggling. And it started in Boston. I went to numerous doctors in Boston. They put me on a treadmill and they did a stress test and they checked my heart and they put me through a gamut of tests. And they just basically told me, you're just healthy. I don't know what your problem is. And so I was like, okay, well, maybe I'm overtrained. Maybe I need to take a break.
All those things that we talk about.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of ran through the checklist that we talk about. And I was still not getting answers. And so when we moved to Tampa, I hired a coach to help me with my Ironman training. And the coach suggested Dr. Heim. And so I went to see Dr. Heim. And one of the first times I went to see him, I couldn't believe that he spent 45 minutes with me. He literally sat down and asked me all these questions. And he himself is an Ironman, so I knew he was an athlete. And he asked me all these questions about, how I was feeling and how my performance was, and he cared about it. And so I told him everything, and he said, did anybody check your ferritin? And I'm like, no, I don't think that was checked. Ferritin being your iron stores. And he checked my ferritin, and it was 9, which is in range. People say that is in range. The range is like what, 9 to
120.
120, yeah. And I was 9. And he was like, that is why you're struggling. Like, you are struggling. And so he kind of helped me with a plan to get my iron up. He gave me a bunch of supplements to help me. The iron was causing my cortisol to be way too high, the lack of iron. So, and he's helped me get back to his best that I can. I did quite a bit of damage, trying to train through some things I shouldn't have done that with. So I wanted to have him come on today and talk about the importance of all of these supplements and ways that we can keep ourselves healthy so that we don't struggle like that.
And Dr. Heim, she said you're an Ironman athlete, which is, sort of the top in our field of what we can do. But how did your history in running and exercising come about?
So I started running very early on, 16, 17, cross country in high school, ran for a year in college. Got into triathlons very early. I think I did my first one at 16 and fell in love. It was the passion of my life. Raced for 35 years, probably have done 70 or 80 races over that course. Last 2 races were Ironman and probably retired now. I did my undergrad in nutrition and exercise physiology, so I was all in on health and wellness and longevity. We didn't call it longevity back then, but so through that time, I've had every single injury, every single condition, every problem that you can think of that athletes go through. So from my coursework and even into med school and residency, I did a lot of my training in sports medicine and orthopedics in terms of what my extra rotations were as a med student, as a resident. And it's just always been a great passion of mine. My first job out of residency was family medicine. That's what my board certification is in. And after about a year and a half, I realized this is not what I went into medicine for. I could not use my background in nutrition or exercise or wellness because you get about 10 minutes per patient, and after that, you have to move on to the next patient. So you're writing prescriptions and moving on. And that's just not what I went into medicine for. So 12 or 13 years ago, I opened up a practice that really I could use all of those things. I didn't know if it was going to work. I just hung a shingle, and Maria showed up one day, and the rest is history.
Well, and she said you spoke for 45 minutes, which if you, that if you've ever been to a doctor, 45 minutes, that's unheard of.
Right. Yes. Our first visit with a patient is an hour typically, and we cover nutrition and sleep and stress, exercise, diet, and then all of the blood work and things that you would typically do with a physician. But it's very comprehensive. We want to attack wellness from every possible angle to promote longevity and health and prevent disease as opposed to treating illness.
And so today, there are a lot of things that can impact your overall wellness. But today we're going to focus in on hormones, because that is something I don't think that even someone like Maria, who was a Boston qualified athlete, had never heard that some of these can impact you so much. So what types of hormone, what should people be looking for when they go to their doctor or asking about?
Well, there's so many things. Some of that depends on what age you are. With Maria mentioning ferritin, not actually a hormone, but very important nutrient that particularly in women who still menstruate and exercise, it's usually going to be low. And that can drastically affect performance and how you feel, energy, recovery. So ferritin and iron are definitely something that I think everybody should check at least once, more so in females than males, but I think everybody should check it.
And one of the things that Maria talks about is not just your iron levels, it's that ferritin, because your iron level can be fine in your blood, but if it's not getting where it's supposed to go, that's the problem.
Correct. Right. Ferritin is your iron stores. So when your stores are low, you're kind of running on fumes. That's how we look at it, even if your iron is normal.
Can you tell us a little bit about what does iron do in the body and why is it important to the athlete?
Yeah, so iron is your oxygen carrying molecule. So obviously every time you exercise, you're carrying more oxygen than normal. The lower that is, the lower your oxygen carrying potential is. So it affects performance and certain recovery because of that. Also affects hair and skin and nails. There's so many other things that go into what iron does. Very important.
Mm-hmm. So what are the typical signs that you look for? Like when somebody comes into your office and says, what makes you check their ferritin?
Well, we typically check ferritin on everybody that comes in. Our first panel is very comprehensive, way more than you'll get in a typical primary care office. And that's going to include hormones. We do a full questionnaire beforehand to see what your symptoms are, and we might add a few more tests in there depending on how you're feeling or what you're going through. But we want to check sex hormones, progesterone, estrogen, testosterone. For women, cortisol is a very important hormone to check. Obviously, ferritin we've talked about, and thyroid hormone is another one. So we want to check as many of those as we can to check off all those boxes. If you're not optimized with your hormones, then your health is not optimized.
Yeah, and the optimization is what I like the most about Dr. Heim, because he always says, I need to find the optimal levels for you specifically. And I'll talk about this a little bit more in my coach's drill, the importance of knowing what those optimal levels are for you. And you can't do it if you don't get it checked regularly. So I would suggest like once a year going and getting your blood work checked.
And one of the things that we were talking about, when we were discussing what we were going to talk about today was, what impacts these hormone spikes or how they get out of whack. And then what can you do, other than going to the doctor, what you can actually be doing to help yourself along the way. And so what are some of the things that people can do right now before they've even seen a doctor to just overall be more healthy?
Well, there's always your foundational stuff. There's a lot of people talk about supplements and hormone replacement and things like that. But if you're not eating well, sleeping well, and exercising, none of that matters. So I would say sleep is probably one of the single most important things you can do to control, to optimize your hormones, I should say, particularly cortisol. If you're not sleeping well, your cortisol is never going to be normal. Obviously, diet greatly impacts hormones. We can ad nauseum go on about that. And then exercise does as well.
And people hear about this cortisol because they talk about it being in the belly fat. Like if your cortisol levels, give you belly fat, but it does so much. When it's high, it really impacts you.
Right. I tell patients cortisol is a hormone that if it's too high or too low, it slowly kills you. So you need to really watch it, make sure it's normal. You can't live without it, though. If we pulled cortisol out of your system, you wouldn't survive more than 24 hours. So it's an extremely important hormone for recovery, injury recovery, illness recovery. You cannot live without it. But if it's too high or too low, it's not a good thing for you.
Well, how do you regulate it?
I have one thing that's frustrating in a lot of my athletes is that they know that their cortisol is high and they're not sleeping. And then sleeping also makes your cortisol high if you're not sleeping enough. So it's like this really bad pattern they get into. They're like, well, how do I get my cortisol at a normal rate once it's off if I can't sleep? Do you have any suggestions on how to do that?
Well, sleep is a whole nother topic we can talk about.
We'll talk about that in a further episode for sure.
But you have to fix sleep before you fix anything else with cortisol. Again, if you're not sleeping well, that is a stress on the body. Cortisol is a stress hormone. It goes up for a lot of different reasons, including exercise. A nice HIIT training will spike your cortisol for a little while because your body needs it to recover. But if you're not sleeping well, it's always going to be dysregulated. It's closely tied to blood sugar, which I think is one of the most important things we watch in people because of the hormones that come after that, insulin, glucagon. But if your cortisol is out of regulation, your blood sugar is always going to be out of regulation, and that will screw up everything.
And what test do you need to know to get these? Because, like you said, you may get 15 minutes with your doctor. What do you need to ask for?
Yeah. Well, if I'm a female, I'm asking for my sex hormones, testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, a morning fasting cortisol, and a thyroid panel, a full thyroid panel. That's what I would start with. Those are your hormones, excluding things like ferritin, all the other things we look at, blood sugar. For men, we don't typically check progesterone and estrogen, but we'll do testosterone, and then the same cortisol, thyroid.
Now, there's a lot of females that are coming up with lower testosterone now. Do you see a pattern in why that's happening, or?
I don't think it's a pattern. I've been seeing it for 12 years.
Okay.
There's a lot of reasons why hormones decline. Mostly it's age. As we age, our hormones start to decline, and that's when our aging really accelerates. So testosterone is a funny hormone. A lot of things affect it, including sleep, just like cortisol. Diet plays a big role. Alcohol consumption plays a big role. Body fat plays a big role. So there's every hormone we look at is affected by so many different things and each other. So if the cortisol is out of regulation, again, your testosterone, estrogen, progesterone are probably not in regulation either.
Yeah.
And
that
so,
makes sense.
We are talking to you specifically, but, for people who are active runners or active in some sort of exercise, but does being an athlete help or hurt some of these in the, at least in the short term?
That's a great question, because you talk about the typical recreational runner, maybe does 5Ks, 10Ks, they're running 20, 25 miles a week. They're not going to impact their hormones too much. When you start getting up to your level and running marathons and things like Ironmans, the body was probably not meant to do some of those things. And, I'm a guy that did it for 30 years, so I know as well as anybody. There's an impact from that kind of extreme performance. I tell Maria that she's putting out a superhuman effort most of the time, and you really have to look at your hormones when that's going on, as well as nutrition. One thing that just popped in my head was the hormone vitamin D. We talk about vitamin D as a vitamin, but it is a hormone, and it plays a huge role in regulating all of those other hormones as well as your immune system. That's another one that we check on every single person that comes in. Half the population is low in vitamin D. You don't really get it from food, you get it from sunshine, but there's still something that has caused it to be low in our population.
Even here in the Sunshine State?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, people think, that's certainly something we should be able to get here in Florida, but
yeah, I read somewhere that in order to have enough vitamin D, you have to be outside naked on both sides for 15 minutes. I'm like, nobody's doing that.
You also have to not shower for about 10 or 12 hours after that exposure, or it just disrupts the production of vitamin D.
So then what do you do?
That's crazy.
I mean, it's just then that's a supplement you're just going to have to take.
You have to supplement, and almost every single person should be on vitamin D because most of us are deficient or very, very low.
And you would just buy a bottle of vitamin D, or is it involved in another supplement? Could you get it in a daily multivitamin?
Yes, you can get it in a multivitamin, but it's usually way too low. Your RDA for vitamin D3 is 800 international units, which is woefully inadequate. We have people on as high as 5,000 to 10,000 units a day, depending on where their levels are. Vitamin D is a vitamin you can take too much of, so you always want to get your levels checked before you go too high with it. But 2,000 units a day is probably good for most people. And
you would say that basically, if before you start adding all these supplements, go see a doctor first.
Absolutely.
I mean, make sure that you know which ones you need and which ones maybe that you can hold back on.
Yeah, because iron you can get too much of too.
Absolutely. Yeah. Iron is not for everybody. Not everybody needs it. But also, I was going to say a doctor that is well versed in nutrition, which is not always easy to find.
And
yeah, I have a lot of my athletes struggle with eating enough. Mm-hmm. They're under eating for what they're doing, and that can really impact their hormones a lot. I see a lot of low testosterone after people are like in a calorie deficit for too long, running many marathons.
Right, because again, we talk about the recreational athlete versus the superhumans. I don't really consider myself a superhuman, but I realize I'm doing things that maybe again not supposed to be doing. So, if someone is just running that 20 to 25 miles a week, are they going to see those same type of issues that happen? And they should still go and check these things.
Absolutely. And age plays a big role. When we're in our 20s and 30s, we're largely bulletproof, unless you're just totally living on the edge and eating crappy and not sleeping. But as we age, when we hit 40, I tell patients that's when the wheels start falling off. Your hormones start to decline.
Is that why I'm so achy these days?
That's a big part of it. And achiness, a good point about achiness that people don't realize, low testosterone will cause that. I see a lot of, particularly women, middle age, that come in. They've got this myalgia, these muscle aches, joint aches that don't really seem to have a cause. They might go to a rheumatologist. They get a workup, nothing comes out. I check their testosterone, it's in the basement. Many, many times that will fix that.
And then how do you get that up?
You take it just like any other hormone.
Okay.
So mostly with women, we use a topical cream. It's very easy to absorb it through your skin. It's very safe, keeps your levels just in normal range. But it's very important for longevity and performance and recovery.
And speaking of recovery, that was one of the things, Maria, that we were talking about it before we came on the broadcast, is that if you have these problems with your hormones, it's going to make not only running or exercising uncomfortable, but it's going to make recovering from them even harder, which then makes it not fun and then makes you maybe not want to do it, and then you're not being active. So this sort of domino effect, just from the fact that if you got the cause figured out, then it would continue to be fun.
Yeah, and I would also argue that in Florida, it's more difficult to train. So you're putting more pressure on your body with hydration and electrolyte needs, and so over time you can really cause damage to your hormones once you're kind of down the cliff, it's really hard to climb back up. So I always tell people, try not to get there in the first place. Like try to train properly so that you're not, I mean, you can, even if you're a recreational runner, go out there and run too hard every day. That is not good for your hormones either. So there's a lot that goes into it. But yeah, in Florida, we have to be even more careful because it's harder for us. It's harder for us to recover.
And Dr. Heim, you've seen that where Florida is more difficult for these hormones?
Well, any stress on the body. So yeah, my last Ironman was 2 years ago, and at 52 at that point, I really was feeling the heat in Florida, whereas before it wasn't as bad for me. But I had a coach that was working with me, and we really had to alter my training because of that. I was waking up in the morning just exhausted. I'm sure my cortisol was in the basement. But absolutely, the heat and the humidity here is at another level than most of the rest of the country.
Yeah, because it's not even that what I usually tell people is that it's not only that it's hot and humid, because that happens in a lot of places. It's the length of time, from May to October, and that you don't get any relief at night. Right. There's no time where your body gets to relax for.
And it's day
6 months.
after day training, and it's hard. Like we pay for these coaches and we pay for this help, but then we don't pay attention to our sleep and we don't pay attention to our nutrition. And I would argue that 20% of it is what I do in my business. 20% of it is the workouts, and 80% of it is the sleep and the eating and the getting your hormones checked and making sure your iron is right. And if you really want to perform well, you have to check on this stuff. You can't just let it slide. It's going to catch up with you if you do.
Well, and it's, even for, like you were saying, even for the person who gets out there and jogs on Bayshore for a couple of days of the week, in the summer, that's a hard workout.
No joke.
Yeah, it's no joke to be out there in the sun and in the humidity. So that's when you may not consider yourself someone who's an avid 40, 50, 60 mile an hour, 60 mile per week person, but it can still be impacting you.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
So what will someone feel like when they start to have these hormones out of whack? What will it feel like so that they at least have a reason to go to the doctor?
Right. So that, again, age-based. So women, sometime in their 30s, early 40s, they start that perimenopausal stage where they start losing progesterone first primarily. So their estrogen is normal or it's very erratic, but their progesterone starts to be very low. One of the things we talk about that is with sleep. Progesterone is a huge impact on sleep. So women start to not sleep as well, which again causes that whole cascade of cortisol being off and blood sugar being off. So certainly if you're not sleeping well, you're not feeling well, you're not recovering as well, you're not going to be as motivated to exercise. So just from that aspect alone, progesterone is extremely important. Hot flashes and night sweats are kind of the next phase there, perimenopause into menopause, again affecting sleep in a huge way for many women. And that will wreck you. The research on sleep is terrifying. If you're not getting proper deep sleep and REM sleep, your risk for every single disease goes up, particularly Alzheimer's disease, heart disease, things like that.
That is terrifying.
Testosterone is more energy. So exercise recovery, energy, drive, motivation, sense of well-being. That's what testosterone brings to the table. I mean, it's a performance enhancer. There's a reason there's a street value for it. It's not why we take it, but your ability to recover and gain fitness is much enhanced when you have normal levels. Thyroid, when you think of fatigue primarily, that's the common theme with all of these. As your hormones decline, as you age, everything goes downhill. So your energy, your ability to produce energy is compromised. Ferritin, another fatigue issue. So that's the theme.
My question is, when you're not sleeping at night, I don't know, I'm not talking about anybody here, but when you're not sleeping at night and you've done all the research and you know how important sleep is, what do you do when you're staring at the ceiling thinking, I need to sleep, I need to sleep, I need to sleep, I'm hurting myself? What do you do?
Well, there's some very simple things you can do first. I mean, there's the sleep hygiene stuff. Turning your lights off at night, if you're watching TV, for instance. We always live under these bright lights, which we're not supposed to. It suppresses melatonin production, another hormone. So diet plays a role, not eating too late at night, keeping your room cool, very cool. They say 68 degrees is actually optimal for room temperature, trying to sleep. Make sure your room is very dark. Any kind of light from alarm pads to, I don't think people have clocks on their nightstands anymore, but all of those LED lights can affect your sleep. So all of those hygienes are first. When you think about supplements, though, magnesium is a very important supplement. Most of us are deficient in it. It's an electrolyte. It helps regulate muscle control, but it's also a natural muscle relaxer. It suppresses cortisol at night. That 3 a.m. wake-up call you get in the middle of the night is typically a cortisol spike from stress. Magnesium helps to suppress that response. So magnesium is your go-to for sleep first.
Okay, so when you look at magnesium, there's a million different supplements out there, and there's a million different kinds. Is there one specific kind that you suggest, or?
So there's 2 that are primarily looked at for helping with sleep. That's glycinate, magnesium glycinate, and magnesium threonate. Threonate happens to get into the blood-brain barrier a little easier, so it affects sleep a little more. We carry 3 or 4 different types in my office. I like a combination, one that has 3 or 4 different types of magnesium, because they tend to get into tissue differently. Some of them get into muscle better, some of them get into the heart better, some of them get into the brain better. But those are the 2 you think about with sleep.
You have me on a powder.
Yes.
What is in the powder?
Yep, that's a mixture. It does have the threonate and glycinate in it. I believe there's some oxide in there as well. Magnesium oxide is not the best form of magnesium, but it is good for gut health. So
Yeah.
primarily what you find over the counter is just magnesium oxide. It's a cheaper type of magnesium, but it doesn't get into the system very well.
I notice a huge difference since he put me on magnesium.
And what is that? Can you buy that over the counter, or is that?
Yeah,
or
you
is-
can get that at any health food store. You just have to look at the labels. Dosing is important too. A lot of people, you asked earlier about multivitamins. You can get magnesium in a multivitamin. It's very, very small amounts though. Most people between 200 and 600 milligrams is your dose. And it's really bowel tolerance. If you take too much magnesium, it can cause loose stools, so you back off the dose.
Well, that's what I was about. I mean, there's something about, I don't know what it is in my brain where I think, oh, if I have to take a calcium supplement and I have to take a magnesium supplement and I have to take an iron supplement and all these, I worry that I'm taking too much. Is that a problem?
It absolutely can be a problem. The rabbit holes you can go down with in supplements is crazy. And even as a physician with a degree in nutrition, I still go down those rabbit holes and try all of them. But that's why we like to look at lab work, see what you actually need as opposed to what you think you need. And then it's kind of based on symptoms and what your lifestyle is like after that. Again, these superhuman efforts that you all are putting out, you need extra B vitamins, you need extra magnesium, you need extra electrolytes and hydration and protein. All of those things are important.
And so you don't think it's a problem then if there's like 6 bottles out there? I mean, I don't know why in my brain I think that's a problem if I'm taking 6 different supplements, but you're saying if that's what my lab work shows, then that is totally okay.
Absolutely. That's how you optimize.
Okay, good to know.
And do you require more magnesium in the summer when you're sweating more?
Absolutely.
Okay.
With activity and with sweating.
Okay.
Anything else that we haven't asked that that you see in your clients and your patients, and you think, if only I could just tell people so I wouldn't have to stop saying it every time someone comes in?
Well, something that a very popular topic now is the amount of protein we eat. There's a lot of controversy on that, a lot of very strong opinions on what is right. Again, the RDA is woefully inadequate. 0.8 grams per kilogram is what it is right now. And that's really just to maintain your baseline. If you're putting out these superhuman efforts, or even if you're just a recreational athlete, you need more protein than that. So we really look at more like 1.5 to 2 grams per kilo, which is almost double.
Tell me what that means. Like if I'm weighing myself in kilograms now, is that what it is? Yeah. I mean, really, is that,
yeah.
Which is 2.2 pounds. I do know what that is.
Yes. So it's easy conversion on Google to go from pounds to kilograms, and then you just multiply by 1.5 to 2, and that's your range. Okay. I think we talked about this recently.
Yep.
And most
Actually,
of us
I think you told me I was having too much protein.
Again, I see a lot of coaches telling
I do eat a lot of protein. I eat a lot of protein because I like to lift weights. So.
And it's not necessarily inherently wrong to eat more than that, but your body just doesn't need it most of the time, and it's extra calories. And so, it's important to get enough protein with all of the people that are intermittent fasting now and time-restricted eating. Yeah, if you're skipping a meal a day, it's very hard to get 90 grams of protein in a day. You have to be eating a lot of protein at each meal.
And there is a lot of research out there for intermittent fasting and menopause. And so I have talked a lot of my athletes out of doing that because cortisol goes too high when you do that, correct?
Yeah, there's a lot of things that happen with fasting. It's a fascinating area. The research is astounding on the health benefits.
Yeah.
But again, if you're training hard, it's probably not the best thing for you. Or you sprinkle it in. You know, in America, we do everything over the top. We want to do it every day, forever.
Yeah.
I think sprinkling it in is probably better for most of us. Or doing a once in a while doing a longer fast, 24, 48 hours, but focusing on that, you know, away from training.
Yeah, and I think that's the key.
Yeah.
Like a lot of people read this stuff online and they say, and because we're such a small population of people that, you know, train marathons, we feel like there's tons of us because we all run. But the reality is there's such a small percentage of us that do this. And so there's not a whole lot of research on what we should be doing. So you have to be really careful when you go online and you say, oh, intermittent fasting is good for menopause. Well, not maybe for marathon runners or not maybe for people that are running even 20 to 30 miles a week, because running puts a tremendous amount of stress on your body. So we have to do things differently, and we have to be very careful about who we're going to for advice, and people that know what they're talking about.
And one of the things you say is if you are an athlete, and that's something that sort of defines who you are, that also should be, you know, if you can, that should be what your doctor is specializing in as well.
Yes.
Because then they understand when you say, I need to eat this much food or I need this thing checked, they'll actually check those things for you.
Right. One of my first visits with Maria, and I've experienced this over and over and over again with those types of athletes, is the single hardest thing for me to get them to do is to stop training.
Yeah.
When your cortisol is dysregulated or you have that adrenal fatigue phenomenon, I tell patients to take 2 weeks off, and they look at me like I've asked them for one of their children.
Yeah.
But that's what it takes. Your body needs to heal. It's on its own timeline, and you have to give it time to do that and give it the fuel and nutrients it needs to do that. You need rest also.
Yeah. Dr. Heim's very good at telling rest. He's very good at that. He knows.
So we just heard from someone on Facebook, from Joanne Golden, and she says, this is very excellent. So thank you. That's what she said. I do think that this is something that just isn't talked about enough, including, you know, even in my world, which, as Maria said, we think everybody must run because everybody I know runs, everybody I talk to runs. But I'm also now low to mid 40s, and I am starting to be like, what is this because I'm getting older, or is this because or is there something I can do about it? Or if you're saying both, but I just need to figure out what that is, because 20s and 30s, man, that was great. I was out there just always feeling great.
Right. We have to change how we train. Like, I think we get so into this, like, well, this worked for me in my 20s and this worked for me in my 30s. Well, what worked for you in your 20s and 30s is likely not going to work for you in your 40s and 50s. And if you love what you do, which we do, we don't want to have to quit running. It just might have to look differently. We might not be able to run as many miles as we ran before. And we might, I mean, I'm sure he's like chuckling to himself over here because he's been telling me this for years. And I'm like,
are you hearing yourself being parroted out of her mouth now?
Somebody listen to me.
Yeah, I mean, I do listen to him for the most part, but sometimes, like, I think last time I went to see him, I'm like, I don't think I can do 40 miles a week anymore. And he's like, oh, really? He just like, he's so good with me, actually. He doesn't say I told you so, but I'm like his like teenager, right?
But there's a gleam in your eye when she says, no, I can't do this anymore. I know, because that's what I have been telling you.
Yes, exactly. But that doesn't mean you can't do it long term. Like,
Right.
It just means it has to look differently, and you have to be more careful, and you don't have to quit running. Like, it's a great supplement to your life, and you can still be competitive. You just have to change it up.
Yeah, and that's sort of what you said at the very beginning of this, is that you just have to change as you age,
Right.
to compensate for what your body is doing, and then you can still perform the way that you want to perform.
Right.
Because you're running a Ironman at 52. I mean, that's big goals. That's big life goals.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. Yeah. There was a 76-year-old guy at the starting line with me at Ironman Florida. So yeah, you can maintain that performance well later into life, but you do have to alter. And my training for this past Ironman compared to 10 years ago was completely different.
Yeah.
But I was in better shape.
And actually, there's so much new research coming out for women, especially. It's just astounding, the research, because there's just been so little research on how women are supposed to train through menopause. And there's just so many good books out there. I just found a new one today that I can't wait to read about how to change the training up so you can optimize performance without trashing yourself in the process. Because trashing yourself before you go into menopause is a very bad idea. That's going to make menopause way worse than than it could be anyway. So we want to avoid that and train smarter, not harder.
When I was talking about this with our anchors this morning about what this topic was going to be about, and I said, if your hormones are off, you can have the run feels really hard. And Avery said, oh, good, because sometimes I do feel like there's just like that run should not have been that hard, and here it was being hard. And so then I also said about the law of thirds.
Yeah.
That a third of your runs are going to feel great, and a third of them are going to feel meh, and then a third of them are going to not be very good at all. But if those get out of whack, if you have 2/3 bad or then you need to start thinking about, that something may be off. But just because you have a bad run doesn't mean you're, necessarily having these issues. But if it's more than a third, where it's hard every day.
And there are sometimes that runs are just bad. Like there's not a reason for it. I think the pattern that you need to look for is if you have multiple runs in a row that are bad. And then along with, I'm struggling with my sleep. I can't sleep. I'm waking up at 1:00. That's what happened to me when my cortisol was all out of whack. I was waking up at 1 and I couldn't go back to sleep until 3. And so if you have some of these up, like run through your list. Am I eating enough? Am I sleeping enough? When's the last time I got my blood work done? If all of those things you've done, and then it's probably just a bad run. Yep. But if something else is off, go get checked. Go get checked.
All right. So Dr. Heim, we really appreciate it. He's already promised he'll come back to talk about sleep, because apparently that's could be, sort of the impetus of all of the, the cascading effects from just not getting enough sleep. So we're going to talk about that. But hormones is just something that I don't think people think about enough, even as someone like me who's been running for more than a dozen years. As I got older, I just now have to start thinking about it. So that we're going to bring that up to everyone.
Dr. Heim, how do we get in touch with you if we want to have a panel done?
So I have an office in South Tampa. It's called Heim Regenerative Medicine. Our office number is 813-384-3107. And the website is tampahealthcenter.com.
Tampa Health Center.
And I love everybody in his office. I go in there for vitamin IVs. When I come off a race, I get some IV B and magnesium and extra C, and just to keep me healthy. And I've been going to him for 10 years, and I love his office. So
Marie is one of our favorites.
Yeah. She's one of my favorites as well. One of the reasons why is because she has some pretty intense thoughts on life.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so did she tell you that we have started a new segment on the show called Coach's 3-Minute Drill, and she gets 3 minutes to talk about whatever she wants.
Ooh, I bet that's powerful.
So, but we have to stop her at 3 minutes. So she doesn't have to go 3 minutes, but she can't go longer than 3 minutes. You ready for today's drill?
Ready for today's drill.
All right.
All right.
So Coach's 3-minute drill about taking responsibility.
All right, here we go. And on today's drill, we're going to talk about blood work. I know you're super surprised by that, but a couple things I have to say about blood work. Get your blood work done when you are healthy and feeling good, because a lot of times we wait until we are feeling lousy, and then we go to doctors like Dr. Heim, and he has to find our optimal level, and we don't have an optimal level to go to because we don't know what our levels were like when we were feeling good. So first off, do that. Second of all, please find somebody that knows what they're talking about. Please don't just go to some random doctor that doesn't know athletes. That's not going to get you anywhere except for a bunch of tests that you don't want to have to take. I took so many tests when it could have just been my ferritin. So please don't just go do your research. And that also means we have to be our own advocate. Please be an advocate. If something is wrong and you know something is wrong, fight for yourself. Don't let a doctor dismiss you. Don't let a doctor say, oh, nope, you're normal. It can happen very often when you're young. And when you're in your 30s and you know something's off, and somebody can just be like, oh, I had a couple doctors tell me to go to yoga. So yeah, I knew something was wrong and I kept fighting for myself. A lot of it happens with women with endometriosis. Please fight for yourself and know that these doctors are great doctors, but they're also doing this. It's process of elimination. They are trying to figure it out. And if they're not spending enough time with you, find a different doctor. Even if you have to pay out of pocket a little bit more, skip coaching for a little while and get your blood work done, because it's silly to pay for coaching if you don't have good blood work, it's really going to affect your performance.
All right. Way to go, Coach. In under 2 minutes that time.
I did it.
Got to say all the things
I didn't have
you
to get the whistle blown at me.
So obviously that ties right into today's topic with Dr. Heim is that, someone who's going to talk to you, there may be multiple things that need to change.
Yeah. And I think, I watched like even Carla, like go through doctors who told her she had heart conditions and really her ferritin was low. Now, I'm not saying ignore things, if that doctors say, but if a doctor does not know an athlete's needs and what their optimal levels are, it can be very difficult to diagnose anything. So you can be paying for tons of tests that just aren't going to tell you anything.
Well, that's why we have doctors that exist, like Dr. Heim, who are out there with us, who are out there exercising and know more of what our bodies need. But
yeah.
But it's also something that we need to, as you said, take responsibility for that.
Yeah,
like as you grow old, you have to think about changing.
And you also have to be patient. Like a lot of these things you have to be patient with. You can't just say, oh, I need to take this hormone. It's not working right now. Like you have to, or I'm going to take a magnesium for 2 weeks and it didn't work for me. Like you have to be patient with the process and keep trying things and try to find that balance.
So do you have many patients?
I've got a few.
Okay. But most
it's
of
not
them,
me, but
most of them do say that, right? Well, I've tried it. It didn't work.
Yeah, very common problem. We try to set expectations early on. You need to give everything a month or two. Don't call me in a week and tell me it's not working. Call me in a month and tell me it's not working. But yes, everything takes time. The body works on its own timetable, whether it's nutrition or hormones or recovery, and you have to give it time to work.
And it could be like, he tried me on a testosterone cream years ago because my testosterone was like undetectable. And I almost like killed my carpool guy. Like I literally was like screaming at him. And I went back to Dr. Heim and I'm like, I don't know this is, I'm a calm person. And I was yelling at people. And he's like, oh, well, maybe the cream doesn't work for you. Maybe we need to try something else. Maybe we need to try it through a shot or whatever it is. Like be patient with it. Communicate with your doctor. I'm lucky enough to have a doctor like Dr. Heim who will say, okay, that didn't work. We got to try something different. And he's not just throwing stuff at me. He's not just like, we'll work with it for a little while. And then if something doesn't work, then he switches it. And then we work with that for a little while. And we kind of have a good thing going on right now. I kind of like it. But yeah, you just might have to try a couple different things.
Be patient. Think about, how you feel. Think about the law of thirds. And if every run is starting to, or every exercise, every time you go to the gym, it feels hard, it might not just be you. It might just be that you're getting older, but you need to change then how you supplement your body.
Yeah. And I know a lot of people that think, oh, I don't want to supplement because it's too many things to take and nobody used to take it before. One of my friends, Eva, I'm talking to you. She's like, people didn't have to take this before. Well, guess what? We're living longer. Our quality of life is getting better because of the research we're doing. So take the supplements. If you can live longer and feel better for a longer amount of time, take some supplements. It's not the end of the world.
And because we talk about this quite often, and it comes up at least half the episodes, is that the idea is to be able to be healthy forever. And if that doesn't mean, running yourself into the ground for a decade and then not being able to do anything for the next 4 decades. It is
absolutely.
How do you keep being active, keep being healthy so that you can live to 90 and still be a 76-year-old man out there doing an Ironman?
Yeah, I mean, it's important. Nobody wants to be bedridden or in a chair. I mean, obviously sometimes it happens and we can't control it, but we want to stay as healthy as long as we can.
Right, that's your health span. We talk about longevity and living long, but how healthy you are during that span is way more important. I'd rather have 70 really good years than have 20 really bad years at the end. So optimizing is important.
Well, thank you, Dr. Heim, for everything that you do. We really appreciate you.
Yes,
especially me. I appreciate you and all you do for my athletes.
And again, this is something that I am now having to learn, and I appreciate being so you giving your time so that we can learn along with me. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thank you so much. We'll see you next week, guys.